The HOA president thought he could steal what was never his, sliding into a parking spot that carried more weight than anyone imagined. Neighbors froze, whispers turned sharp, and the air cracked with the arrogance of power unchecked. What began as a stolen space spiraled into betrayal, exposure, and a showdown with someone untouchable, the mayor himself. And before we start, like this video and tell in the comments where you're watching from, because this is a story you won't forget. The morning shattered with a silence so heavy it felt staged. All eyes locked on the HOA president's car, parked bold and unashamed in a spot that was never his. Neighbors froze, their breaths clipped, hearts thudding as though they knew this was the moment everything would crack. He stepped out, chin high, smirk carved across his face like victory itself, daring anyone to challenge him. His voice sliced through the stillness, claiming this place was his now, that he ran this neighborhood, that no one could stop him. Laughter followed his words, laughter that stung, laughter meant to humiliate. It wasn't just a parking spot. It was a declaration of war. The crowd whispered, but no one moved. Fear was thick, pressing down on every chest. Some had felt his wrath before. Fines for harmless things, threats slipped under doors, sudden rules written overnight. He thrived on control, and today he was drunk with it. One neighbor clutched her child closer. Another lowered his eyes, too scared to meet his gaze. The president saw it, fed on it, and his grin widened. But not everyone bowed. A voice rose, calm yet sharp, cutting through the arrogance like steel. That spot isn't yours. The smirk didn't falter. He turned, slow, mocking, asking whose spot it was if not his. Around him, shoulders hunched, heads lowered, no one daring to speak. He repeated the question louder, taunting, demanding submission. That's when it happened. A single hand reached into a folder, pulling free a document, its edges creased, its ink stamped with authority. The sound of paper unfolding was louder than his laughter. The deed. The proof. A name written that even he couldn't sneer away. But instead of silencing him, it lit the fire in his eyes brighter. He scoffed, brushed it off, called it fake, called it worthless. His tone rose, filling with fury, as if shouting would erase the truth staring him down. The neighbors leaned closer, their fear colliding with curiosity. Who truly owned that spot? Why was the president suddenly louder, harsher, desperate to crush the revelation before it spread? The one holding the paper didn't waver. The voice steadied, each word loaded with finality. This spot doesn't belong to you. It never did. And the man who owns it outranks you in every way. The president laughed again, but it was brittle, cracks showing beneath the surface. His arrogance masked unease, and the neighbors caught it. For the first time, the mighty ruler of their streets looked small. The whispers grew, spreading like fire, tugging at his mask of control. And still, the paper stood firm, held high enough for every eye to see. The president demanded to know the name, spitting venom in every word, his voice shaking with the first hint of panic. But the reply was withheld, deliberately cruel, feeding the suspense until it could no longer be contained. That name had weight. That name would burn his empire down. That name was power, protection, and justice rolled into one. The neighbors leaned in, breathless, hearts pounding. The president leaned back, sweat breaking through the mask of arrogance he had worn for years. The reveal hovered like a blade over his throne of lies. And when the answer finally broke free, it didn't just cut him, it destroyed him. The real owner of the spot wasn't anyone he could bully, threaten, or fine into silence. It was someone far beyond his reach. Someone who had been watching, waiting, ready to strike. The paper carried the name of the mayor. Gasps tore through the crowd. Some clutched their mouths, others stepped back, unable to believe what they had just heard. The president's face drained of its triumph, color vanishing as quickly as his power. For years he had ruled unchecked, but now the very ground beneath him was gone. The whispers turned to murmurs, the murmurs to bold voices. The neighborhood was alive, and for the first time, it wasn't on his side. But before anyone could blink, before anyone could even process the downfall unraveling before their eyes, he straightened his shoulders again. His voice strained, but he forced laughter, louder, emptier than ever. He shouted that the mayor would never care about this, that the mayor was too far above them all to care about a spot on cracked pavement. He tried to rally, to claw back what was slipping away. But the look in the crowd told the truth he wouldn't face. He was finished, and he knew it. The question now wasn't whether he'd fall. It was how. The document folded slowly, deliberately, a move that signaled this battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Eyes stayed locked on him, and for the first time, his own eyes darted, searching for escape. His laugh was gone, his confidence fractured, and the ground he stood on trembled with the weight of the truth. That name, that one name, had rewritten everything in an instant. And as he opened his mouth to protest one more time, a hand slipped into a pocket, fingers curling around a phone. The number being dialed was one he thought unreachable, but the ringing tone that filled the silence told him otherwise. And when the line clicked alive, when a voice far more powerful than his own spoke on the other end, the president's world cracked open, and the cliff beneath his throne gave way. The name hit like a strike of lightning. The mayor, the one man in this city whose word could bend steel, whose decisions shaped every life in reach. The HOA president's grin collapsed into a jagged line, his hands twitching at his sides. For years he had ruled these streets with petty fines, crooked rules, and threats whispered in the dark. But against the mayor, he was nothing more than a shadow pretending to be fire. The crowd felt it too. Faces once bowed and silence lifted, hope flickering like sparks. For the first time, the giant looked small. The president barked out a laugh, thin and desperate, trying to stitch together the mask already torn apart. He sneered that the mayor didn't care about this place, that he had bigger wars to fight than a painted rectangle of asphalt. He claimed it was all theater, that the document was fake, staged, a trick to embarrass him. But his voice betrayed him. Every word rose higher, sharper, scrambling to cover the crack of fear spreading inside him. Neighbors exchanged glances, disbelief etched across their faces. If it was fake, why did he look so afraid? Then came the sound that cut through every doubt. The faint beep of a phone dialing, steady, deliberate. The president's eyes widened, panic flashing before he caught himself. He lunged forward, hurling insults, demanding the phone be put down, insisting no one could just call the mayor like dialing a neighbor. His voice cracked with each denial, and the crowd knew. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was begging. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. The silence that followed burned hotter than fire. Then it happened. A click. A voice on the other end. A voice that carried weight. A voice that did not ask questions. It demanded answers. The president froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His arrogance had been gutted in an instant. The call was real. The mayor was listening. The neighbors gasped, some clutching their mouths, others stepping closer, their fear giving way to thrill. For years, they had been silenced. Now, justice had picked up the line. The voice on the phone was calm, too calm, every word slicing through the air with precision. What's happening there? The question left the president trembling. He stammered, trying to paint himself as the victim, to twist the story before the truth could reach the mayor's ear. But the voice on the other end didn't buy it. The words were clipped, demanding, and sharp. Explain. Now. The president faltered, his excuses tumbling out, sloppy and weak. But another voice cut him off, the voice holding the deed. Strong, unwavering, telling the truth in plain words. The spot was stolen. The neighbors were witnesses. And the paper in hand proved the mayor's name sealed it. The crowd nodded, murmuring louder now, their courage rising as they realized the truth had found a stage it could not be silenced from. The president's face contorted, veins rising as he hissed that this was all lies, that they would regret defying him. But his threats sounded hollow, pitiful even, compared to the authority spilling through the speaker of that phone. The mayor's voice grew colder, harder. He said he would handle this himself. He would come down. The president's body stiffened, the blood drained from his face. He barked again, desperate, shouting that the mayor was too busy, that this wasn't worth his time. But it was too late. The promise had been made, and every eye in the crowd now glistened with the kind of anticipation no tyrant could crush. A low hum cut into the air, the sound of engines, at first faint, then louder, sharper, rolling closer with each heartbeat. Neighbors turned, their faces a blend of awe and disbelief. The president's chest heaved, eyes darting in panic. He tried to shout them down, tried to insist it was nothing, just coincidence. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The sound grew stronger, undeniable. Tires screeched, and the air thickened with the weight of arrival. The president stood frozen, his grip on control slipping like sand through his fists. The crowd shifted, eyes wide, whispering, recording, hearts pounding with the kind of suspense that could tear open a city. The president's reign had been unshakable for so long, but now it was seconds from breaking apart. The sound was not the police. It was heavier, more commanding. The sound belonged to the mayor's own security detail, and they weren't here to negotiate. The president's lips quivered, his fists clenched tight, as though he could fight back the inevitable with sheer will. But there was no stopping what had already been set in motion. The crowd waited, their voices caught in their throats. Every second stretched into eternity. The president's bravado crumbled before their eyes, his voice no longer thunderous, but trembling, thin, desperate. The mayor was on his way. The ground was already shifting. And as the engines roared closer, everyone knew the storm had finally arrived. The engines cut, and silence bled into the street like the calm before a storm. Doors slammed in unison, heavy footsteps striking the ground with authority. The crowd shifted, torn between awe and disbelief. The HOA president's face twisted, his bravado snapping as reality tore through him. He had mocked, threatened, and laughed, but none of that mattered now. The mayor had kept his word. He was here, and he had not come alone. The mayor stepped forward, sharp-eyed, voice laced with fire and control. He didn't ask questions, he demanded answers. Who authorized this theft? Why was his name, his authority, dragged into a petty power game? The president's voice cracked as he tried to speak, muttering excuses that slipped like sand through his teeth. He swore it was a misunderstanding, swore the neighbors were exaggerating, swore the paper was forged. His voice wavered with every word, desperation gnawing at his once unshakable pride. The mayor didn't blink. His silence was sharper than any blade, cutting the president's excuses to pieces. Then came the words that froze the air around them. "You parked in my spot." The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling like waves. The president staggered, eyes darting, mouth opening and closing as though words might still save him. But the mayor wasn't here for words. He was here for truth. One of the neighbors stepped forward, hands shaking but voice steady, recounting every detail. The threats, the fines, the way the president had bullied families into silence for years. Another followed, their voice rising, emboldened by the presence of someone who could not be silenced. Then another. One by one, voices that had been muted for so long rose together, building into a chorus of defiance. The president's empire of fear was crumbling before him, and he could do nothing to stop it. The mayor's eyes burned into him, unrelenting, as the crowd revealed his sins. A mother spoke of threats against her children. An elderly man described money stolen in bogus fees. A young couple admitted they were too afraid to park in their own driveway without permission slips. Every story was a knife driven deeper into the heart of his reign. The president shouted back, his words bitter, desperate, but the people no longer flinched. The shield of his power had shattered, and his voice carried no weight. The mayor finally raised his hand, and silence fell. His words were sharp, final. Enough. The president's chest heaved, sweat dripping as his kingdom collapsed before his eyes. But instead of retreat, he tried one last desperate strike. He spat venom, accusing the neighbors of conspiring against him, of jealousy, of weakness. He laughed again, hollow and wild, clinging to arrogance like a drowning man clings to wreckage. But no one laughed with him. The sound only made him smaller. The mayor didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice dropped low, but it struck harder than thunder. He told the president his time was over, that his reign of threats had ended the moment he touched that spot. His crimes were no longer whispers. They were evidence, recorded, witnessed, undeniable. He demanded the car be moved, demanded respect be restored. The president's lips curled, his pride thrashing against the inevitable. He refused. The crowd erupted in shock, gasped sharp and loud. Even stripped of power, he clung to his throne of arrogance, refusing to move the car. His voice roared, veins bulging, declaring that no one, not even the mayor, could humiliate him in front of his people. But his people weren't his anymore. Their eyes no longer looked up to him, but past him, toward the man who had shown them what real authority looked like. The mayor didn't waver, didn't raise his voice. He simply made a call with a flick of his hand. Engines roared again, this time louder, heavier. A tow truck rolled into view, its chains clanking, steel jaws ready to devour. The crowd gasped again, phones raised, hearts racing as they realized what was about to happen. The president's knees shook, his eyes darting frantically as though searching for an ally. But there were none. His board members stood silent, neighbors he once ruled now grinning, whispering, recording his downfall. The tow truck rumbled closer, and the weight of karma pressed down. His pride demanded resistance, but his body betrayed fear. His reign was seconds away from being torn apart piece by piece. And as the hook of the tow truck lowered with a metallic groan, the president's mask shattered, and the last threads of his power snapped in full view of the entire community. The tow truck's chains clinked like the sound of judgment itself, and the president's voice cracked as he screamed for them to stop. But no one listened. The mayor's eyes didn't waver. His stance was unshakable. For years, people had lived under the weight of the president's threats, but now they were seeing what real power looked like. Calm, unbothered, unstoppable. Phones recorded, hearts pounded, and whispers spread like wildfire. Every eye burned into the man who once believed he was untouchable, now trembling as his empire collapsed with every passing second. The president tried to bargain, words spilling fast, promising donations, offering favors, insisting he could fix whatever had been broken. He pleaded with the mayor, lowering his voice, begging for mercy he had never once shown to anyone else. But the mayor didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the neighbors, asking for their voices. Did anyone here feel silenced? Did anyone here feel betrayed? And like an eruption, the truth spilled. One by one, neighbors spoke out, each testimony heavier than the last. A mother stepped forward, eyes burning with years of rage, recounting how the president threatened to evict her after she couldn't afford a bogus fine. A man with a cane told of nights he was fined for leaving lights on too long, money drained from his savings until he had nothing left. A teenager admitted his family lived in fear of simply parking their car wrong. The president's face twisted with each story, his arrogance crumbling, his fists clenching tighter as though he could hold his lies together with sheer force. But the words tore through him, ripping apart the foundation of control he thought was permanent. The mayor raised his voice, cutting through the noise with a force that silenced every breath. He accused the president of corruption, of intimidation, of theft. He said the stories weren't just rumors, they were evidence. He spoke of records pulled from the city office, showing misused funds, forged fees, and backdoor deals that lined the president's pockets while neighbors bled. Gasps erupted, people covering their mouths as the truth hit harder than anyone expected. He wasn't just a bully. He was a thief. And now, his sins were dragged into the light. The president staggered back, sputtering, denying everything, calling it slander, screaming that none of it could be proven. But his voice no longer held power. The crowd didn't shrink. They pressed closer, voices rising, demanding answers. Some shouted for his resignation, others demanded jail. The fear that had once chained them was gone, replaced by fury, unity, and hunger for justice. The president's eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline, for someone to defend him. But the board members who had stood behind him now stepped forward, their faces pale, their voices trembling. One confessed first. He admitted the president forced him to sign papers under threat of losing his home. Another revealed she had been silenced with bribes, told to look the other way while neighbors suffered. Their words were knives, each betrayal stabbing deeper, twisting the blade. The president's mouth hung open, his chest heaving, as he realized the people he called allies had turned, exposing the rot he tried to bury. Betrayal clung to him, suffocating, stripping away the last mask he had left. The mayor's voice thundered again, declaring that justice would not wait. He announced charges would be filed, investigations opened, and punishment delivered. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping, shouting, their voices a chorus of triumph after years of silence. Tears streamed down faces, not of sorrow but of relief, of freedom. They were finally unchained. The president staggered forward, screaming that he was the real authority, that they would regret this, that he would destroy anyone who crossed him. But the sound of chains lowering again drowned him out. The tow truck's hook snapped onto his car, steel teeth ready to drag his pride away. He lunged, clawing at the tow, spitting rage, but hands held him back. Neighbors he once ruled over now blocked him, their eyes hard, their shoulders steady. His kingdom was gone. His voice cracked into shrieks, his desperation bare, as his car lifted slowly off the ground. The vehicle that symbolized his arrogance dangled like a trophy of his downfall, cheers and shouts echoing louder with every inch it rose. But just when the cheers reached their peak, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Blue and red lights painted the scene, cutting through celebration with a chilling reminder. The police were here, and no one knew whose side they were on. The crowd fell silent, hearts clashing between hope and fear. The president's eyes lit with twisted relief, believing salvation had arrived. The mayor stood still, his jaw tight, ready for what came next. The people held their breath. The president smirked again, thinking he was saved. But what waited inside those flashing lights would decide his fate forever. The sirens screamed louder as the cruisers skidded into place, lights flashing against faces tight with anticipation. The crowd's cheers dimmed, nerves rising like smoke. For years, the police had been little more than pawns in the president's hand, enforcing his petty fines, turning blind eyes to his corruption. The neighbors froze, uncertain whether justice had truly arrived or if the system would once again shield the man who had crushed them. The president's lips curled upward, a twisted grin breaking through the panic. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and with sudden arrogance declared that his people had come for him. He shouted over the crowd, bragging that he had the city in his pocket, that no one could touch him. His voice grew bolder with every word, feeding off his fantasy of invincibility. The neighbors' hearts sank, the relief they had felt just moments before crumbling under the weight of doubt. But the mayor didn't move. His gaze locked on the officers stepping out, calm and unflinching, as though he already knew which way the tide would turn. The president raised his arms like a ruler reclaiming his throne, smirking as he beckoned the officers forward. But then it happened. The lead officer didn't look at him. He looked at the mayor. He saluted. And with that single gesture, the crowd erupted in gasps. The president's grin froze in place, cracking under the realization that the badge no longer shielded him. His face drained of color as the officer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, asking if the mayor wanted him detained. Detained. Not honored. Not respected. Detained. The crowd exploded, voices surging with joy, disbelief, and righteous fury. The president staggered back, his arrogance collapsing faster than the car being hauled away behind him. But the mayor didn't rush. He let the moment breathe, let the weight of betrayal press down on the man who had ruled this place with an iron fist. The board members who had once stood silently behind him stepped forward again, each confession slicing deeper. One revealed stolen HOA funds funneled into private accounts. Another admitted to threats written into contracts. Each revelation landed like a hammer against the president's chest. He screamed that they were liars, traitors, that he would ruin their lives. His words tumbled out like venom, but they no longer carried fear. Instead, laughter spread through the crowd, raw, unrestrained, mocking. For the first time, the tyrant was the one being ridiculed. The mayor raised his hand, and silence fell. His voice carried like steel as he ordered the president to remove his car from the stolen space. It was a command meant not just for compliance, but for humiliation, stripping him of the last shred of authority. The president's jaw locked, veins bulging, pride gnashing against the reality closing in. He refused. He roared that no one could force him, that he would rather be dragged in chains than surrender in front of his people. His defiance was a final weapon, desperate and brittle. The crowd gasped, some angry, some in awe at his refusal to bow even as the walls collapsed around him. The mayor's face hardened, patience gone. He spoke again, voice low but lethal, promising that refusal would seal his fate. The president didn't back down. He stood rigid, chest heaving, daring the world to break him. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, trapped in the suspense of a man clinging to pride even as it drowned him. The officers shifted, ready to move, and the president shouted louder, spitting hatred at every neighbor who dared watch his downfall. He accused them all of betrayal, of cowardice, of weakness. His voice shook with rage, yet beneath it, cracks of fear splintered through. He wasn't roaring as a ruler anymore. He was screaming as a man who had lost everything but his arrogance. The mayor gave one final order, his words sharp as knives. Tow it. The tow truck groaned, gears grinding as the chain pulled tighter. The president lunged forward, fists raised, eyes wild, but hands caught him, officers forcing him back. The crowd screamed, some chanting, some laughing, phones capturing every second. The luxury car, once the gleaming symbol of his dominance, lifted higher, swinging helplessly as cheers tore through the street. The president's roar cracked into something broken, something desperate, as the symbol of his pride was dragged away piece by piece. But just when it seemed his humiliation was complete, the mayor turned again to the officers. His voice cut through the chaos with a final, devastating blow. He told them the car wasn't the only thing leaving tonight. The man who believed he was untouchable would be leaving too. The crowd gasped, then roared louder than ever, voices colliding in a storm of triumph. The officers stepped forward, cuffs in hand, closing the distance inch by inch. The president's bravado shattered into terror as he realized this wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was the end. And as the officers reached for him, the crowd surged forward, desperate to see the tyrant finally fall, hanging on the cliff of justice about to drop. The officers moved in, cuffs glinting, and the president thrashed like a cornered animal. His voice cracked into screams, shouting that this was illegal, that they had no right, that the mayor was nothing but a puppet playing politics. But no one listened. The crowd's roar drowned him out, a tidal wave of voices chanting for justice. His reign of fear had turned into a carnival of downfall, neighbors who once cowered now standing tall, recording, laughing, crying, united in their demand to see the bully finally broken. The president tried to pull away, his body jerking, fists swinging wildly, but the officers closed around him with precision. Every time he lunged, he was pulled back. Every scream he threw into the night only made him look smaller, weaker, more desperate. He turned to the board members, the very people he once controlled, spitting venom, demanding they defend him. But they lowered their eyes, guilt washing across their faces. They had already betrayed him, already fed the truth to the mayor. He was alone, abandoned, and for the first time, he knew it. The mayor's voice cut through the chaos, firm, commanding. He told the officers to proceed. The words landed like hammers. The president's knees buckled, and for a moment he begged, his arrogance replaced with trembling desperation. He pleaded for forgiveness, swore he could change, promised to repay what he had stolen. But his words rang hollow, echoes of a man who only feared the end, not the harm he had caused. The neighbors jeered, some shouting that it was too late, others calling for prison. His empire had turned into a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. The tow truck groaned again, hauling the last of his pride away. The luxury car, once polished like a crown, was now dragged like garbage, the crowd cheering louder with every screech of metal. He watched it vanish, his face contorted with rage and grief, the sound of laughter and clapping carving into his chest. That car had been his throne, his weapon, his proof of power. Now it was a symbol of karma, paraded before the very people he tormented. His scream tore through the air, guttural, raw, but no one pitied him. The crowd shouted louder, phones flashing, justice finally recorded. And then the cuffs snapped shut. The metallic clicks silenced the street. The president's arms jerked behind him, his face twisted with fury, veins bulging as he shouted that this was a mistake. He promised revenge, swore lawsuits, screamed that everyone watching would regret turning on him. His words hit the air like broken glass, sharp but powerless, cutting no one. The officers forced him forward, each step a humiliation carved into his pride. The neighbors shouted for more, demanding the mayor expose every crime, every theft, every hidden secret. They didn't just want his car gone. They wanted his entire empire burned to the ground. The mayor stood tall, voice rising above the chants. He promised the investigation would uncover everything. He told them the money stolen would be returned, the threats punished, the corruption dismantled. His words weren't just promises, they were sparks of hope. The crowd roared back, not just with joy, but with relief. For the first time in years, they felt safe, unchained, free to breathe without fear of the next fine or threat. Some neighbors cried, others laughed, some shouted gratitude into the night. The community had been broken for so long, but now it pulsed with life. The president's mask of arrogance cracked for good. His face crumpled, eyes wet, not from remorse but from rage at losing everything. He screamed again that he was the real authority, that the mayor couldn't touch him, that this would all collapse tomorrow. But no one believed him. The people he once commanded were now pointing, mocking, recording every second of his collapse. His fall was entertainment, justice, and relief all wrapped into one. He twisted, tried to fight, but the officers dragged him further, his shouts becoming nothing more than background noise. Yet just as the car vanished around the corner and the president was pushed toward the cruiser, something shifted in the air. From the crowd, a voice rang out. It wasn't cheering. It wasn't mocking. It was trembling, raw, filled with something heavier than anger. A neighbor shouted that this wasn't over, that there were secrets buried deeper than parking spots and stolen money. The words cut through the celebration, silencing laughter, pulling every eye back into focus. The mayor's expression darkened, his jaw clenched. The crowd hushed, leaning in, their hearts pounding again. The president's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. That voice had struck something deeper than pride. His arrogance faltered, his face twisting in terror. He shouted to silence the man, his voice frantic, his desperation spilling out in ways that revealed what he had fought so hard to hide. The neighbor's words echoed again, louder this time, claiming that what was stolen went far beyond money. It was bigger, darker, something that had been hidden under layers of threats and fear. And in that moment, the crowd realized the fall of the president wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The words hung in the air like a spark threatening to ignite an explosion. What was stolen went beyond money. The crowd stiffened, eyes darting from the trembling neighbor to the president being dragged in cuffs. The president's voice broke into frantic screams, demanding silence, threatening vengeance if anyone dared say more. But the desperation in his tone betrayed him. For years, he had silenced voices with fines and fear, but tonight those voices grew louder, and nothing could cage them anymore. The neighbor stepped forward, his fists clenched, voice quivering but strong. He spoke of documents hidden in files, proof that the president had not just stolen from the people, but from the city itself. Kickbacks, land deals, bribes so massive they reached far beyond this neighborhood. Gasps surged through the crowd, shock rippling like a storm. The president thrashed harder in the officer's grip, screaming that it was all lies, that no one could prove anything. But the panic in his eyes told the truth he couldn't bury. The empire he built wasn't just corrupt, it was rotten to the core, and the mayor had just been handed the keys to expose it all. The mayor turned, his face carved with fury and resolve. He demanded to know more. The neighbor hesitated, then revealed what everyone had whispered about for years. The president had been funneling HOA funds into secret accounts, laundering money through city projects, and bribing officials to look the other way. What the people thought were petty fines and stolen dollars were just crumbs of a much larger feast he had devoured. The crowd roared in disbelief, rage pouring from their throats. They had been bled dry not just for his greed, but for his ambition, his hunger to climb higher, to control more than just their streets. The president's mask shattered. He shouted that the neighbor was a liar, that the mayor couldn't prove it, that they were all pawns in a trap. He spat venom at everyone who looked his way, his arrogance crumbling into madness. His screams turned into sobs, wild and broken, as the officers forced him toward the cruiser. The neighbors didn't flinch. They shouted louder, demanding every secret be exposed, every stolen cent returned. Phones were raised higher, comments flying in live streams, their voices finally louder than his threats. The tyrant had fallen, and now his crimes would follow him wherever he went. The mayor raised his hand again, steadying the chaos. He promised the truth would come out, that investigations would dig deep until nothing remained hidden. He declared that this wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about a system that thrived on silence and fear. His words pierced every heart in the crowd. For years, they had swallowed pain, thinking their voices didn't matter. Tonight, they learned how wrong they had been. Tonight, they saw that even the smallest stand could topple the biggest giant. The crowd erupted again, not in fear, but in triumph. They had their voices back. The president was shoved into the back of the cruiser, his screams muffled behind glass. He pounded on the window, face twisted in rage, but no one looked away in fear anymore. They watched him like a spectacle, like justice delivered in real time. The sound of the door slamming shut was a final nail in the coffin of his rule. The cruiser pulled away slowly, the crowd chasing after with chants, cheers, and tears streaming down their faces. The tyrant was gone, but the fire he had ignited with his corruption was far from extinguished. The mayor turned back to the people, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. He told them that silence is what feeds corruption, that bullies grow only when good people stay quiet. He warned that there will always be those who think power makes them untouchable, but they fall the hardest when people stand together. His words wrapped around the crowd like armor, leaving them with something stronger than relief, resolve. They weren't just witnesses. They were proof that unity can break any chain. As the night settled into murmurs, laughter, and relief, the neighbors realized something haunting. The president had ruled through fear, but fear had never been his true weapon. His weapon was silence. And tonight, silence had been broken forever. The mayor shook hands, his presence a reminder that justice was not a myth, but a reality when the right voices rose at the right time. The neighbors smiled, hugged, cried, recording every last second, determined never to forget what they had seen. And before the moment closed, the voice of the storyteller cut through like fire. If you've ever stood against a bully, if you've ever seen power abused, then you know this fight isn't just about parking spots or fines. It's about every voice that refuses to stay silent. If you feel this story, like this video, drop a heart in the comments so I know you're with me. And subscribe for more stories that tear the mask off corruption. Because tonight, the HOA president didn't just lose his spot, he lost his empire. And what the neighbors discovered after his arrest would shake the city even more.